Sophia, welcome to the studio. Welcome to, or back to, the Gymnastics Growth Show.
Thanks very much, Nick. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today.
No, my pleasure. I was listening to our earlier episode, and for the listeners' benefit, that was number 64, before you arrived today, and it just struck me again, there was just so much value that you provided in that, and I'm definitely going to reshare that content because there's just, so much good stuff in there about athlete-coach relationships, of course, and honoured that you've made the journey to come back today. Thank you.
Well, I look forward to our conversation.
Yes, yeah. Let's hope it's a rich one. So, since we last spoke, and I can't remember exactly, it probably would have been a couple of years ago now, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. How's your work evolved since then? Is it all still in the same direction? Has it expanded? Have you gone deeper?
More or less, we are still, in the same area. We work very much around trying to understand and discover the complex interpersonal dynamics between coaches and athletes and what makes coaches and athletes tick together as one unit. In addition to that, we have done a little bit of research around team dynamics because clearly the coach and the athlete often work, especially at the high performance level, with a number of other individuals. The sports science team, for example, psychologists, physiologists, biomechanists, and so on. And we try to understand how this network of people work together with the coach and the athlete. So we've done a little bit of work there as well. But mainly it remains to be at the heart of the work that I do, the coach-athlete relationship.
And with the team dynamics, do you use different profiling tools? I mean, there's a lot of them now, aren't there? Are there profiling tools that you use in part of your work? And you've developed some things yourself in this area, haven't you?
Not particularly within team dynamics.
No,
we haven't.
Coach.
The coach and athlete. We have. We can profile the quality of the coach-athlete relationship and communication patterns. But the team dynamics, we have a conceptual model that we kind of put together to kind of capture how these individuals work together and the important components. For example, leadership is very important. Who takes the leadership when there is a whole host of people involved with the coach and the athlete? What is the common understanding? The goals and the plans that they have to work on, and the communication, and again the relationships that these individuals develop. And let's not forget that when you have a scientific team with individuals that come from different scientific disciplines, how one understands the other is hugely important. So,
So, Sophia, for the benefit of those that haven't listened to episode 64, I think it's probably a good idea that we start with what this athlete-coach relationship is. What does it mean? So let's just go into that first. We can kind of make sure the listeners are well aware of that before they then revisit that conversation if they haven't done so already.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So the coach-athlete relationship. Over the years, so the past 20-25 years, that was one primary questions that we wanted to understand, because clearly relationships are very complex, very dynamic. And when we started this investigation, when we started looking into the coach-athlete relationship and started asking coaches and athletes to tell us, what is this relationship that you develop with one another? How do you understand it? Each individual will give us different answers,
right.
And that highlighted the complexity of this phenomenon that we call coach-athlete relationship. So what we did, we collated hundreds and hundreds of responses from coaches and athletes in order to help us understand what that relationship really is, and we developed a model that kind of outlines the complexity and the multifaceted nature of the relationship that the coach and the athlete develop. So what we know from this research that we have conducted is that there are four dimensions or layers to the relationship. I'll start with the first one, and all of them are equally important to have a good quality relationship. The first is closeness, and closeness refers to the affective, the emotional tone of the relationship, and it is captured by such key relational properties such as trust, respect, appreciation, and interpersonal liking. So you will expect the coach and the athlete who are in a good quality relationship to demonstrate these relational properties at a high level. So both coach and athlete trust one another, respect one another, appreciate one another, and liking one another. And in their interactions, you can see that this is happening. And closeness is very, very important. That affective element is a very important driving force to the outcomes that they are trying to achieve separately and together. The next layer from that is commitment. So commitment reflects the intention of the coach, the willingness of the coach and the athlete to maintain a close relationship over time.
Yep.
Now, we both know that simply you cannot achieve good technical skills and so on without being with one another at longer times. You need to work with one another over a period of time, and it is important that the coach and the athlete know that there is commitment. There is a level of accommodation as well between. And actually, commitment, what we are finding from the research, is the glue that keeps the coach and the athlete together during good times, but more importantly, during challenging times, during difficult times. So if there is a burnout or injury or some other personal issues, it is the commitment that keeps the coach and the athlete together. The next layer down is complementarity. Now, complementarity is synonymous to cooperation or collaboration, and it captures the interactions between the coach and the athlete that are cooperative, that are collaborative. So, for example, when the coach and the athlete show responsiveness to each other's efforts, receptiveness to each other's needs, when you see them being at ease or relaxed in each other's presence, they are adopting a friendly stance as opposed to a hostile, distant or cold stance. Yep. So all of these characteristics are important. And when we observe these positive interactions, behaviors, then we know that there is a high level of complementarity or cooperation, if you prefer. And also within complementarity, we capture the specific roles that the coach and the athlete occupy in the specific coach-athlete relationship. So the coach you expect to have a certain role to fulfill, and the athlete a certain role to fulfill. And this is important that we acknowledge in the relationship. So you've got closeness, commitment, complementarity, and the last is co-orientation. And co-orientation is essentially the level of similarity and understanding that these individuals have achieved over the course of their relationship. And you will expect in newly established relationships, their co-orientation or common ground, we call it common ground as well, to be very small because, they're starting to build their relationship, to get to know each other, slowly, to understand each other's preferences, needs, wants, desires, fears. So that is kind of developing, whereas in more established relationships, you will expect the common ground or co-orientation to be much larger because now the coach and the athlete know each other, understand one another. And it is important here to say that how useful it is that the coaches not only make an effort to get to know their athletes at the start of a new relationship, for example, because there is a lot of investment, I guess, when the coach and the athlete begin a new relationship. But what I'm trying to say here is that the significance is that they maintain that level of inquiry over the course of the relationship. Otherwise, you kind of you become complacent. So these are the four characteristics or dimensions, qualities that underline good quality relationships.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. That's really, really useful. And you mentioned that the responses that you got from the research were vastly different, but those were the common trends that they would fit into those sort of areas. What was the I guess you'd know the scientific term for this, but the eligibility to take part in the research? Was it athletes and coaches of a certain level?
Well, we had a rather what we call heterogeneous sample, so a very diverse sample of coaches and athletes operating at club, county, regional, national, international levels. Okay,
it's quite broad.
Quite broad. As I said, different sports, different performance levels and so on. And that will provide us with a great breadth of data so that we find patterns. And therefore, what we call the 4 C's, closeness, commitment, complementarity, and co-orientation, that define and shape quality relationships, can fit very well with all these different individuals operating in different sports, whether it is individual or team sports or different levels and so on. So it gives us the confidence that we can employ this framework, for example, to analyze and explore different coach-athlete individuals, dyads.
Yeah, nice. And I guess, irrespective of whether you're working in high performance or you're a club participant, the relationship is just as important to you. You need to feel safe. You want to feel valued. You want a great athlete-coach relationship there. So, just some interesting context for me there.
It is absolutely necessary, because if you think in individuals, not just athletes and coaches, but one basic need that we all have is that need of belongingness, that need of connection. And if we are disconnected in whatever environment we operate, then the morale goes down, disinterest kind of seeps in, and we kind of get disengaged. Whereas if our need for belongingness that we all have, all creatures, all human beings have, if it is fulfilled and fulfilled within the sport environment, then you are able to flourish and thrive. Because you know that there's somebody, like you said, that is cared, valued, and it helps you be yourself.
And be a best version of yourself in that environment. You mentioned that they're in no particular order. So by looking at the research, does it kind of state that each one of those sort of sections is just as valuable, and if you were to take any one of those out, then there would be a breakdown potentially of that relationship?
Yeah, I think that assumption is very right, and research shows that we need all 4 C's, or all 4 elements in order to create a good quality relationship. For example, if there was a distrust or disrespect in the relationship, but there was, for whatever reason, commitment, maybe because the athlete or the coach were in a program where they have to work together, that will not be classed as a good quality relationship. There will be an element that really kind of brings the relationship quality down, and it doesn't maximize it in terms of reaching the goals and working together in a way that is functional and to its optimal level.
I wonder how many coaches compromise. So they'll be aware that the relationship isn't great, but they don't want to disrupt it or to change it because they're nervous of the athlete leaving, for example. I mean, I've certainly had conversations with coaches that they're working with a very talented athlete, let's say, and they tolerate more than they should, and that might be with the athlete or maybe the parents in that relationship. Like, it's not a healthy relationship at all. But because the athlete is talented and they could be a vessel for them to advance in their coaching as well, they might kind of put up with it. What do you kind of feel? I mean, how do you feel about that? What are some of the red flags that you would question with that?
Yeah, that is an interesting scenario, and a scenario where I can envisage that is not the most functional. Because if the coach is in the relationship because the athlete is just talented, it might signal to me that there is not that genuine connection between the coach and the athlete. And if it was genuine and the coach was putting up with a lot from, say, the athlete, then I think the coach doesn't quite play their role to the best of his or her ability. So what I'm trying to say here is that I will expect a coach with a difficult athlete, for example, yet very talented, to sit down with the athlete and have a discussion about what is going wrong and how this might be affect not only their interactions and the relationship, but also their future goals and interim goals as well. So it is not ideal if a coach feels that this athlete is difficult, but I'll have to kind of put up with it or tolerate it. I think the best avenue for a situation like that is for a coach to sit down and have a very deep conversation with the athlete and resolve it and try to address it.
Yeah. You'd mentioned when you were talking, it might have been closeness, potentially the next C in line. You remember the order better than I do. You mentioned the word challenge or conflict, I think, there. I'd like to talk a bit about that, because I think that, again, in the athlete-coach relationship, even the fantastic ones, conflict is going to arise, right? And challenge and conflict, let's say that they're probably quite different things. So in order for an athlete to become the best version of themselves, they're going to need to be challenged, right? And the coach is the best person to do that, usually. So how does that dynamic get affected, and what's important for coaches to understand if they are to challenge in a healthy way with the athletes in a way that maintains the relationship and doesn't compromise either their ethics or the relationship moving forwards?
Yeah. That's absolutely a great point that you are making there. And in fact, you mentioned that the coach is, he or she is well placed to challenge the athlete in order to improve. I will also highlight that athletes want to be challenged, and the coaches need to feel that expectation, because that is their role. In a good quality relationship, the way I see it is that in a good quality relationship, where there is trust, there is respect, there is the commitment, good collaboration and cooperation between them, and there is that mutual understanding. We have developed an understanding and a similarity. We know where we are going, and we agree with that. Then what happens is that the coach can challenge. Coach can take difficult decisions and can have hard talk and provide hard feedback to the athlete, and can be even critical and even negative. But the athlete can't take it. Because he or she knows that comes from a good place in a good quality relationship. In the same way that when the athlete challenges the coach and asks questions, the coach is happy to receive those questions and address the issues that perhaps have been raised, because they are in that trusting, respecting and committal relationship. So, and what I often say here is that this is a sweet spot for challenge when it happens in an environment where there is a high level of connection and interdependence between the coach and the athlete. So if we can achieve that is great. And coaches can have the confidence that if their relationship is good, they can push their athlete without fear or concern. And the athlete know that the coaches will take care of them and will sensitively and intelligently push them. So there is a good sense here. Now, the other scenario, of course, that we can discuss here is what happens with when the relationship is still good, and there are all the components that we discussed earlier, but challenge is low. And I'm sure you have seen, coaches and athletes in relatively good relationships, but that challenge is not optimal. It's not optimized. The coaches, for whatever reason, perhaps not push enough their athletes. And what happens here is that what I hear and what we observe is that coaches perhaps try to save their athlete in order to meet all their needs. So what happens here is that communication is poor, and there is a lot of fear. Fear for rejection, fear for displeasing, fear for losing the relationship. And it is not clearly a good place to be. And this is a blind spot of good quality relationships, and we need to keep an eye on it. Because you can have all these fantastic and good ingredients that make a good relationship, but then challenge is not quite there. The coach is not prepared to challenge the athlete, and the athlete is quite happy to be in that comfortable, space. But
they suffer ultimately because then they don't improve. Or
Correct.
They hit that barrier and they don't push through it together.
That is it, yes. So it is a blind spot of good quality relationships that we need to keep in mind. And then, of course, you've got the diametrically opposite, as I call it, whereby you've got a poor quality relationship where there is lack of trust, respect, there is lack of commitment and cooperation. And the challenge is not there. So what happens here? So here we've got a situation whereby there is avoidance of communication. So the coach and the athlete don't communicate. The athlete has got different priorities from the coach. The athlete and the coach has got no plans or goals. So again, the challenge is very low, but it is low in an environment where the relationship is very poor. There is a great deal of disconnection here between the coach and the athlete. And as a result, in this scenario, in this situation, what we are likely to see is dropout.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a great deal of disinterest, no relationship, no challenge.
No progress, I'm sure.
No progress.
Yeah.
Why am I here? The athlete often might ask.
Mm-hmm.
And the coach is completely, removed himself from that.
Yeah.
Often you might say that they prioritize other athletes over the athlete in question. And that is a really sad place to be, and coaches perhaps and athletes need to reflect to see how they can get out from a situation like that in a positive way, not necessarily part ways, but how can we build a relationship that is more effective, that works for us, and then we can raise the challenge as well. And last but not least is a situation, a scenario whereby you have a poor quality relationship with one another, but the challenge is quite high. And we've seen that, when the coach and the athlete is rather disconnected, yet the coach really pushes the athlete because that's their role, I guess, that's how they see it. And what happens, of course, in these situations where we see coaches pushing their athletes is a lot of intimidation can take place, a lot of negative coach behaviors you will see in this scenario. The coach is intimidating their athletes, controlling their athletes, punishing their athletes, embarrassing their athletes, what we see from the athlete point of view is burnout and exhaustion.
Yep.
Because the coaches haven't got the intelligence or sensitivity to stop pushing because they don't know the athlete. They're completely disconnected from that athlete. Yep. And actually they don't have any respect or appreciation or indeed commitment because the athlete is quite, they can find a different athlete to join their program, for example. Yep. It is indispensable.
Yeah. Or dispensable.
Dispensable. Dispensable.
And so there's a lack of psychological safety that athlete would experience as well, I would imagine, in that relationship. They don't feel safe at all.
Correct. Well, the communication doesn't exist, or it's very poor, very poor communication. So psychological safety thrives when the communication is open. When both the coach and the athlete can speak to one another and say it like it is. And of course, it is very much the coach is very well placed to create that open environment, that psychological safe environment whereby allows or indeed invites the athlete, come and speak to me. I want your feedback. I welcome your feedback. Your feedback will help me to help you. Yeah. But psychological safety doesn't exist in any of the scenarios or situations we described, apart from the one where the coach and athlete have a good quality relationship and also push the athlete at the optimal level for that particular athlete. The right challenge point.
Yeah. This is such good content for people. I'm loving this. I really am. And I've got so many examples in my head of where I've seen these relationships perhaps not work. I've some for myself as well that I've experienced, and also others that I've gone, that is why, or one of the main contributing factors why that partnership has really been successful, because you can see what's been invested. So with that, is it like a quadrant? Is it a diagram? What you've described.
Sports psychologists do like this 4 matrix.
I use them as
models.
Well.
So we have categorized. We've got 4 categories or 4 scenarios or 4 situations or cases whereby you can see those things happening. Okay. And of course, maximal growth, as I said, takes place when the relationship is good and the coaches can challenge and the athlete are more than happy to receive that challenge.
So with that category, the gold standard one, what do the listeners need to be thinking about with their athletes that they're working with? And because some of them might be working with younger children as well. And I think the nature of some of the things you've described happens through a long relationship. So they're not going to happen within 3 months. It might take 3 years or longer. What are some of the key things that you believe the listeners should be thinking about when working with their athletes that are going to help them get to that place where they've got a great relationship, but also they're able to challenge too?
Yeah, I think one of the greatest things for me, and the one that I really tried to instill in coaches is that coaching is all about collaboration. Coaches cannot do it alone. They need their athlete. Coaches don't have a crystal ball. They don't have all the answers. And whatever age or experience their athlete might be, athletes have a lot of knowledge, a lot of resources that coaches can tap into. Yeah. And what is required, of course, in that is allowing the athlete to participate in the coaching process, allowing the athlete to be able to speak for themselves. We often say about how important it is for our athletes to be autonomous and independent, to work on their own volition, to understand why they're doing what they're doing. We want our athletes to be motivated, but it won't happen, without the coaches creating that environment, that climate, for them to operate in that fashion. So from grassroots, coaches don't need to feel that their role is to impart knowledge. They need to bring their athletes in, ask them questions, simple questions. How do you think this skill went for you? How did you interact with that particular apparatus, for example? Whatever their level, whatever their age, asking questions is very important. So it's kind of changing a little bit the way coaches coach. During training, but also what they do before training and after training is important. So little things about, and what I emphasize is the one-to-one interaction is very powerful, extremely powerful. Often coaches might interact with the teams more often than not, and it will be an interesting experiment for the coaches to kind of see how often they actually interact with one-one as opposed to the entire team or group that they coach. So one-to-one interactions are mostly important. So a little pat on the back doesn't take too much time, but that is one-to-one interaction. High five, it is one-to-one interaction. So they need to incorporate all of those small things that take no time into their coaching. But also, as I said, what they do before training and after with their athletes is important. So a little interaction and communication, how was your school, or how was, work, or how was, how is your mom or dad or school? It's very, very important that they get to know each other and develop what we called earlier their co-orientation, their common ground. And also for coaches to be a little bit more vulnerable as well, to share a little bit about themselves, about their family even, or why they do what they do, why are they coaches, so that the athletes also feel a little bit that they've got something from their coaches, and it's not just, give, and it's all one way. So this two-way process, this two-way interaction is extremely important, and the one-to-one, very, very important. So you asked me, what they can do. So I think these little things can do and takes no time, and it's not difficult
accessible for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So coaches need to think what they do and how they do it and when they do it, and do it with each one athlete in the team, and make sure that they do it with each one athlete in the team is important. Not with one athlete, in the group, they're perhaps they are most favorite or preferred or most talented. They need to spread themselves across all their athletes, or all their athletes feel that they're connected and included and part of the team.
So here at NR Gymnastics, we're once again super proud to be partnered with Little Stars Leotards, who've been a fantastic partner for us over the years. Not only do they provide exceptional service for their customers, but they're a great team for us to work with, and they provide us a lot of value too. It's no surprise that so many clubs here in the UK, but also overseas, are making the switch to Little Stars Leotards for their service, but also the quality of leotards and clothing that they provide to the community. So if you're interested in checking out why they're such a great team to work with, visit littlestarsleotards.co.uk. And thanks again, Little Stars, for being such a fantastic brand partner. The term athlete-centered coaching comes around a lot, and I've also heard programs being described as, athlete-centered but coach-led. Can you just share a little bit about your thoughts on what that terminology would mean? Like, what does it mean to have an athlete-centered approach to coaching, and what do coaches need to consider in terms of how they choose their own philosophy and what that, the implications would be from that?
that is a great question. Again, I'm very pleased that you asked me because I often talk about the coach-centered approach to coaching and the athlete-centered approach to coaching, which I see them at the opposite ends of a continuum, kind of stretching away from each other. So the coach-centered approach, if we just start with that, it's all about the coach. The coach dictates all the proceedings. It's about command and control. The athlete plays a very small role in the process, or indeed none. And it is the type of coaching that I received as an athlete many years ago.
Right.
My coach never asked me, what are your goals, your expectations, your dreams, your fears, your preferences. I don't think my coach ever asked me about anything at all.
Okay.
One of the coaches that I had. And then, of course, the athlete-centered approach is the diametrically opposite from the coach-centered approach to coaching, whereby the athlete now is at the center of coaching, and the athlete is expected to know their needs, their goals. They're very much at the center of the coaching process. And what is interesting in the athlete-centered approach that I feel is happening, and that's why we need to incorporate, like you said, athlete-centered approach to coaching, but coach-led.
Yeah.
The athlete-centered approach to coaching for me devalues the role of the coach, whereas the coach-centered approach to coaching devalues the role of the athlete. So in more recent times, I said that coaching is it's neither nor, if you think. It's not just the coach or just the athlete. It's about these two people working together. So I offered what I call the coach-athlete combined approach to coaching, whereby coaches and athletes' joint contributions are at the center of coaching. We don't emphasize one or the other. It is about the coach and the athlete. It's this interpersonal process that is happening. You cannot have coaching without the athlete. You cannot have coaching without the coach, right? And actually, as we discussed earlier, the quality of the relationship between one coach and one athlete defines or shapes effective coaching. The coaching that you give as a coach is defined by what you know about that athlete, but you need to be connected with one another. You need to understand one another in order to provide the best coaching for that particular individual. And that takes us in the territory of, we hear about individualized coaching or personalized coaching, whereby the coaching is specific to the athlete, because athletes are so different from one another, even in the same sport, in the same discipline. They've got different characteristics that the coach needs to take into consideration. The mentality, the psychology is different. Their bodies, the physiology is different. So the coach needs to know, they need to understand each one athlete. And the only way to do it is to have that connection, that deep connection.
Yeah, I love that. And so is it acceptable, maybe acceptable is the wrong word, appropriate, acceptable, and I guess to be expected that coaches have got their own aspirations that they also want to achieve through the coaching process, and that's okay. So you can still have an approach where you're putting the athlete first with the decisions about their welfare, their goals. There's the athlete-centered part of that, but it could also still has to be in line with what the coach wants from that relationship too, or the partnership and the results. Because I think sometimes maybe the pendulum swings a bit too far and people think, well, it's not okay for the coach to want to go to this. It's not about the coach. It's like, no, it's not just about the coach, but it is still about the coach. And I personally don't see that being a problem. Like, I didn't start coaching when I was younger because of the athletes. I started coaching because I enjoyed being in the gym and I loved the process of learning and teaching. And then I had my goals. And of course, as I developed as a coach, I started to really value the importance of it being like my aspirations, not overshadowing what was important for the athlete. So of course the athlete comes first in that, but I've still got my goals and aspirations. And so how do you feel about that? Is that an acceptable thing or something that we should be shying away from?
No, it's not acceptable. And I think we have started talking about also about the coach as a performer. So, the way I see it is that we've got two performers actually that, they have to work together, to achieve maximal, to achieve their goals. And in fact, the athlete cannot achieve their goals without the coach. And in the same way that the coach cannot achieve their personal goals without the athlete.
Yep.
And therefore, we've got two performers there that they have to consider, how do we fit in order to achieve essentially our personal, but also
shared
objectives and goals. So it is very important not to neglect that fact, and that is absolutely fine. And it considers what I suppose you may want to consider how you view these people, because if you see them as two performing, and actually, as a coach, you try things. You don't have all the answers, as I said earlier. You don't have the crystal ball. You have to kind of trial and error and work with the athlete and change and adjust and modify. And there are two people working together making those adjustments, if you think about it, because you get a lot of feedback out from the athlete, what you tried or you want to kind of consider is working, and then you readjust and you try. So it is about two people working together, if you think about that. And I see actually coaches as being performers with the great demands placed upon them in the same ways that athletes have great demands to consider in their preparation and when they are performing. So I think yes.
Because those relationships could be, a coach-athlete relationship could be over a decade, 2 decades. It's a great act of service for a coach to be working with an athlete purely at the service of the athlete's needs and requirements, but that's a big chunk of their kind of career as well. And so, I've always just kind of thought that it should meet the needs of both people there. With transparency,
sure.
As opposed to there being any kind of hidden.
And that's why, the relationship kind of addresses, I think, this issue that you are bringing up from the point of view that the relationship, when it is a good quality relationship, the hierarchies are being managed.
Yeah.
So, you are no longer, the person that orchestrates everything. You are with the athlete orchestrating everything. And when we talk about accountability, responsibility, and ownership, these are being shared because of that environment that we have developed through that connection.
Yeah, okay. And so you mentioned there about autonomy, you mentioned empowerment earlier on as well, accountability. I did want to talk about that. How much is that something that has to be earned and not assumed, do you think, through this relationship? I mean, I think a lot of coaches would love for their athletes to take on that sense of autonomy and for them to have the accountability. But at what point can a coach say, I think you've earned the right for us to do that now? Because, I mean, obviously a 9-year-old, the relationship's going to look quite different, but there might be some 18, 19-year-olds that still might demand that they want more empowerment or accountability or autonomy, say, but they're not necessarily in a place to actually accept that without it affecting performance.
Yeah. Well, that is where do you start? There are a lot of angles you can take to answer this question. I guess. Are you saying that there might be resistance on the on the part of the athletes
no? More a lack of competence, or maybe that they aren't showing up. So that what they want and what they're capable of showing up and delivering on might be two different things, and the coach might be aware of that. It's like, I'm listening. I appreciate that you want some autonomy here, but my concern is that you're not ready for it without impacting performance, for example.
Absolutely, yes. And I guess, being honest, and transparent and open with our athletes is what our athletes expect and want. Yeah. So if you don't make it an issue that is assumed, and you are very clear, I want to give you what you need in terms of autonomy in this instance and independence. Yep. But I feel that we need to be cautious, because if I do, it might be it might have the inverse effect, the outcome. So we need to be cautious, and perhaps what you can do so that you build the confidence of the athlete is little steps towards the direction of independence. So you give a little bit,
Yeah.
and then you start trusting the athlete. Okay, we are getting there. And the athlete feels that, okay, what the coach said to me makes sense, and I can see that slowly but surely I can get where I want to get, but perhaps I'm not quite ready to take all the autonomy or that I feel I need at this point in time. And at the age of 18, I will expect that a lot of athletes are capable to take initiative. But what happens also that we need to be vigilant is that how these athletes have been brought up in the system may not have allowed them to take that ownership, and it may be the organization or the new program that they're in want them, but they just can't because they don't have the skills. They are not equipped. They don't have the skill set to take that ownership. Yeah. And therefore coaches can guide them through with the little steps, the little goals towards that. In addition to that, I will caution with what we know from our research about the personality of the athlete. There are athletes who don't want to simply take that big, responsibility. They rather leave it to the coach or coaches to help them and guide them, and they're quite happy. Other athletes, like you mentioned, they may feel ready, but not quite to take that ownership and guide themselves and be independent and so on. So we need to be very vigilant and very receptive. Who is our athlete? Who is the person in front of us when it comes to such decisions and important matters?
And I guess from what you're saying there, the organisations and the coaching team have a great sense of responsibility to make sure that they do arrive at a place by the time they're 18, for example, that they are able to accept more responsibility, that they can be empowered, and hopefully that's going to be better for everyone involved. Whereas if it's been quite a controlling relationship and it's been very much coach-led all the way throughout that journey, then
they're not ready.
We shouldn't be surprised that they're not going to be ready.
Correct.
And maybe the athlete is wanting a bit more, but then you can't give them that. But a lot of this is about letting go as a coach. Well, actually, it's not letting go, but it would be perceived as letting go of control. But actually, it's not letting go, is it? It's about getting to a stronger place of the relationship as opposed to, releasing some power that we're hungry to maintain.
I mean, you will think that, by the age of 18, 19, when the athlete becomes adult, they have had about 10 years before, of a lot of exposure in their sport. They have a lot of information, a lot of resources. So you at this level, you would want to tap as a coach into their resources, to understand what they know, what works for them, what doesn't work, and so on. And if the athlete is not prepared to know and understand, that what they have accumulated, it will be problematic. But also, as I said, let's be mindful of the personality of some athletes. Some athletes will want to take on board a lot of responsibility. They may be ready or may not, and we can help them towards that goal. But there will be other athletes who I don't want them to be seen as lazy or not interested in their sport. Their personality is such that they rather have other people and that's okay. Guide them. And that is absolutely fine. Okay. Is the coach and the athlete finding their ways of working together and understanding. So don't, bang your head on the wall if your athlete is being not responding to some of your requests. Just have a discussion and discuss why is it, how can we progress, and what we need to do.
And I guess a lot of this comes down to, again, the closeness. So without that sense of connectedness, without the trust, the safety, so many things that you've mentioned, it's going to impact, this conversation is going to impact so many others. I just get this growing sense that, and I talk about this with a lot of the leaders that I coach, the club owners and the managers, that we can only arrive at this place through proximity. So unless you're making time for these conversations, and which some of these conversations are not just sort of 1 or 2 minute ones that you can have, they are sit down at depth and really understand each other. But unless you're doing that, you can't arrive at a place where this relationship is going to be super strong. It's a bit more superficial and surface level.
Sure, I mean, it's a great point. And I would say we need to be very deliberate and very intentional in building these relationships. It is important that we invest time, effort, and energy, because the relationship will not develop naturally, or it will develop and will never be, at its optimal.
Yeah.
So we need, as coaches, to develop those relationships, to make time. Coaches are very innovative and creative in their approaches. So it may be the 5-minute conversation before training or 5-minute conversation after training.
Yeah.
The accumulating effect.
Yeah.
It is quite a lot. And of course, the luxury, as I call it, of having a one-to-one over coffee or in the office.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are, invaluable times that you can spend with your athlete and make them very purposeful in terms of, what are we discussing here? Why are we here? How can we create that connection, that understanding between the two of us? Hugely important. Yeah. But I often, in a previous session I had, I suggested to coaches that as they develop their, what do you call them? Their periodization, with the preparation season and the competitive season, and then and so on. I say maybe you can actually periodize a little bit your relationships in that, so that you don't miss opportunities to have a discussion that is a little bit deeper, a little bit more purposeful and meaningful with your each one athlete, and don't let any athlete outside from the conversations. Often we do leave our athletes, perhaps athletes who are not our stars. We leave them at the end. But I think we need to be as equitable as possible when it comes to relationships.
Yeah.
To avoid the creating preferences and cliques. Absolutely. And all of that.
And it's not just about performance, is it? It's about the experience.
It is about
that lower performing athlete might not be your next high flyer, but ultimately their experience in sport should be just as important as the top athlete as well.
But also, I often say that relationships do move mountains.
Yeah.
And that relationship that you never had with that athlete for XYZ reasons, if it starts flourishing, you may see actually performance, improving to the levels that you never thought possible.
Yep.
And in fact, our research highlights that relationship quality, you might see it as a soft, characteristic in, a lot of other bigger things within developing a champion. But the relationship does directly impact objective performance. Yeah. It is clear in the research that we are doing. So it's not only, the good feel factor that I have and the experience that I have with my athlete or with my coach. It does actually converts into good performance.
Yeah. Well, I guess if you're getting more commitment and you're able to challenge more, I mean, these are all qualities that we need for performance as well. So, yeah, amazing. Sophia, this has been a fantastic episode. This reminds me of why I do this podcast. Like, the content that you've just shared and the expertise is just so valuable to the audience. And so I'm immensely grateful for your time and your expertise and willingness to come back on the podcast, because it makes a difference. The work that you're doing really makes a difference. So just want to say thank you so much. And hopefully we can have another conversation in the future again. And much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Nick. I really enjoyed the questions. And I hope we have another session.
Me too. Could talk for hours.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Gymnastics Growth Show. Now, if you're an ambitious gymnastics coach with a hunger for self-improvement, check out my Gymnastics Growth Academy, where you'll find members from over 40 countries, all accessing my masterclasses, courses, templates, live community calls, exercise libraries, and so much more. It's a program that members have described as life-changing. So why don't you check it out for yourself? Head to gymnasticsgrowth.com to learn more. See you on the inside.